They called her a ghost. At the city's most exclusive restaurant, Jane was designed to be invisible, a silent servant pouring wine for men who controlled the global economy. They thought her silence meant ignorance. They thought her lowered eyes meant submission. But Julian Thorne, a billionaire on the brink of losing his empire, was about to learn that the most dangerous person in the room wasn't the shark sitting across from him, but the waitress filling his water glass. When a billion-dollar deal turned into a trap set in a language Julian couldn't speak, Jane didn't just break the rules of service, she broke the silence. And what she said changed everything. This is the story of the girl who spoke the world and the man who finally listened. The rain in Seattle was relentless, hammering against the panoramic glass walls of the Obsidian, the city's most pretentious dining establishment. Inside, the air smelled of truffle oil, aged mahogany, and old money. Jane Vance adjusted her apron, her fingers trembling slightly. She was 24, with eyes the color of rain-washed slate and hands that were red and chapped from harsh detergents. To the patrons of the Obsidian, she was furniture, a prop. She was Waitress North 4. Jane, table 9 needs water. Now. The hiss came from Marcus, the floor manager. Marcus was a man who wore suits that were too tight and cologne that was too strong. He treated the staff like cattle and the customers like gods. Yes, Marcus, Jane whispered, grabbing the crystal pitcher. Table 9 was the power table. It was secluded in an alcove, offering privacy for deals that could shift stock markets. Tonight it was occupied by Julian Thorne. Julian was 32, the CEO of Thorne Tech, and currently the most stressed man in Washington. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way, dark hair, jaw tight with tension, and eyes that scanned the room for threats. He was sitting opposite a delegation from the Volkov Consortium, a massive energy conglomerate based in Eastern Europe, led by the intimidating Viktor Volkov. Jane approached the table silently. She had learned the art of invisibility during her childhood, moving between foster homes where being unseen was the safest way to survive. "Mr. Thorne," Viktor Volkov said, his English thick and heavily accented. "Your offer is acceptable, but the timeline? It is impossible." Julian leaned forward, his knuckles white. "Victor, we can deliver the software in 6 months. I have the best engineers in the country." Jane poured the water into Julian's glass. She moved with a practiced grace, but her ears were pricked. She wasn't just a waitress. Before the debts piled up, before her mother got sick and the medical bills drowned them, Jane had been a prodigy, a scholarship student at Georgetown Linguistics. She didn't just learn languages, she absorbed them. She could hear the rhythm of a sentence and taste the grammar. As she pulled the pitcher back, Victor turned to his associate, a slippery-looking man named Dmitri. Victor switched to Russian, rapid, low, and guttural. "Look at him sweat," Victor said in Russian, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "He thinks we are stalling for time. He doesn't know the contract has the liquidation clause buried in the appendix." Dmitri chuckled, replying in the same language. "By the time his lawyers translate the new draft, he will have signed away the patent rights. We will strip his company for parts by Christmas." Jane froze. The pitcher hovered in midair. A single drop of condensation fell from the glass to the tablecloth. "The American fool," Victor added, still in Russian. "He is staring at the shark and thinks it is a dolphin." Julian smiled at them, oblivious. "Gentlemen, I assure you, Thorne Tech is transparent." Jane's heart slammed against her ribs. She needed this job. She needed the tips. If she spoke, she would be fired. Marcus would throw her out into the rain without her shift pay. Her mother's medication cost $400 a month. She couldn't afford to be a hero. She finished pouring the water. Julian didn't even look at her. To him, she was just a hand extending from the shadows. "More wine, gentlemen?" Jane asked, her voice steady, though her knees were shaking. "No." Victor dismissed her with a wave of his hand, not looking up. Jane walked back to the kitchen, her mind racing. Liquidation clause. Patent rights. They were going to destroy him. Inside the kitchen, the noise was deafening. Chefs shouted, pans clattered. Marcus grabbed her arm. "You were hovering, Jane. Rich men don't like hovering. Get back out there. The French delegation at table 4 wants the dessert cart." Jane nodded, numbness spreading through her. She shouldn't care. Julian Thorne was a billionaire. He would survive. She had rent to pay. But as she pushed the dessert cart past table 9, she looked at Julian's face. He looked exhausted. There was a desperation in his eyes that she recognized. It was the same look her mother had when the eviction notice came. He wasn't just a suit. He was a man drowning, and he didn't even know he was underwater. She parked the cart near table 4, but her attention remained locked on the Russians. Victor's phone buzzed. He picked it up and spoke in German this time, assuming Julian wouldn't track the switch. "Ja, the transfer is ready," Victor said into the phone in flawless German. "As soon as he signs the letter of intent tonight, the shell company in Zurich activates. We take the IP and dump the stock." Jane's grip on the dessert cart tightened until her knuckles turned white. German. Russian. And earlier, she had heard Dmitri swearing in Serbian when he dropped his fork. They were circling him like wolves. Julian pulled a gold fountain pen from his jacket pocket. "If we're agreed on the terms," Julian said, sounding hopeful, "we can sign the preliminary agreement tonight." Victor smiled, a smile full of teeth. "Of course, Julian. Let us toast to partnership." Jane couldn't breathe. It was wrong. It was theft in plain sight. She made a choice. It was a stupid choice. A choice that would ruin her life. She left the dessert cart. She walked straight to table 9. "Excuse me, sir," Jane said softly. The table went silent. Julian looked up, annoyed. Marcus, spotting her from across the room, started sprinting toward them, his eyes wide with rage. "We didn't order anything," Julian snapped. "Leave us." "I can't do that, sir," Jane said, her voice gaining strength. She looked directly at Victor Volkov. "You have a smudge on your glass," she lied, reaching for Julian's water goblet. As she leaned in, she lowered her voice to a whisper, speaking fast. "Don't sign. Appendix C, liquidation clause. They're funneling the IP to a shell company in Zurich." Julian froze. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. "What?" Marcus arrived at the table, breathless and furious. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Thorne. This incompetent girl is leaving immediately. Jane, get out! You're fired!" Victor stood up, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "What is the meaning of this? Why is the help interrupting us?" Jane stood her ground, despite Marcus gripping her arm. She looked at Victor and spoke. Not in English. "I apologize, Mr. Volkov," Jane said in perfect, crisp Russian. "I was just explaining to Mr. Thorne that the shark he is staring at is definitely not a dolphin." Victor's face drained of color. His jaw literally dropped. The arrogance vanished, replaced by the sheer shock of being exposed by a waitress in a stained apron. Dmitri stood up, knocking his chair over. "Who is this?" he barked in Russian. Jane didn't flinch. She turned to Dmitri. "The liquidation clause is a bold move," she continued in Russian, her accent indistinguishable from a native Muscovite. "But discussing the Zurich Shell Company in German on an open phone line? That was careless." She then turned her gaze to the phone on the table and switched to flawless German. "The transfer isn't ready, is it? Because if Mr. Thorne signs, he isn't partnering with you. He's signing his own death warrant. The entire restaurant had gone quiet. Other diners had stopped eating. The clinking of silverware ceased. Julian Thorne sat slowly back in his chair. The confusion in his eyes cleared, replaced by a cold, hard fury. He looked from the pale Russians to the small, trembling waitress who had just dismantled $1 billion conspiracy in 30 seconds. "Is this true?" Julian asked, his voice dangerously low. He looked at Victor. Victor stammered, switching back to English. "Julian, please. The girl, she is crazy. She is a nobody. Are you going to take business advice from a servant?" Julian didn't answer Victor. He looked at Jane. What did they say about the patent rights? "They plan to strip them by Christmas," Jane said, reverting to English. "The contract is a trap." Marcus, the manager, was shaking. He didn't understand the foreign languages, but he understood that a disaster was unfolding. "Mr. Thorne, I will call the police. She's disturbing the peace. Jane, get out before I drag you out." "Let go of her," Julian commanded. The authority in his voice was absolute. Marcus released her arm as if it were red hot. Julian stood up. He picked up the contract that was lying on the table. He looked at Victor, then ripped the document in half. The sound of tearing paper echoed in the silent room. "Get out," Julian said to the delegation. "You are making a mistake," Victor hissed, his eyes narrowing. "You need this capital." "I don't need thieves," Julian countered. "And if I ever see you near my company again, I'll have my legal team bury you so deep you'll need a mining permit to get out." Victor sneered, gathered his coat, and motioned for his team to leave. As he passed Jane, he leaned in, whispering in Russian, "You will regret this, little mouse." Jane didn't back down. "I doubt it," she replied in Russian. The delegation stormed out. The heavy glass doors slammed shut. For a moment, Julian just stood there. Then he turned to Jane. The adrenaline was fading, and reality was crashing back in on her. She had just humiliated powerful men. She had caused a scene. Marcus stepped forward, his face purple. "You are finished in this city, Jane. Do you hear me? You'll never work in food service again. Get your things and go." Jane nodded, fighting back tears. She knew this would happen. "Yes, Marcus." She untied her apron. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably now. She placed the apron on the table, right next to the torn contract. She didn't look at Julian. She couldn't bear to see pity in his eyes. She turned and walked toward the kitchen doors. "Wait!" Julian called out. Jane stopped, but didn't turn around. "I'm sorry I caused a scene, sir. Good luck with your company." She pushed through the swing doors, grabbed her coat from the locker, and ran out the back exit into the pouring rain. She didn't have an umbrella. The cold water soaked her uniform instantly. She walked to the bus stop, her heart breaking. She had lost her income. How would she pay for her mum's specialist next week? A sleek black limousine pulled up to the curb, splashing water onto the sidewalk. The rear window rolled down. "Get in," a voice said. It was Julian Thorne. "No, thank you," Jane said, hugging her coat tighter. "I take the bus." The door opened. Julian stepped out into the rain. He was wearing a three-piece suit that cost more than Jane's life earnings, and he was getting soaked. He didn't care. "You just saved me $800 million, Julian said, wiping rain from his forehead. "And you lost your job doing it. The least I can do is give you a ride." "I don't need charity," Jane said, her pride flaring up. "It's not charity," Julian said intensely. "It's a job interview." Jane blinked, raindrops catching on her eyelashes. "What?" "I don't need a waitress," Julian said, taking a step closer. "I need someone who can listen to liars and tell me the truth. How many languages do you speak?" Jane hesitated. 7 fluently, 3 others conversationally, and I can read Latin and ancient Greek. Julian stared at her, stunned. Who are you? I'm just Jane, she whispered. Get in the car, Jane, Julian said gently, opening the door wider. Please. She looked at the warm interior of the car, then at the cold, dark street. She climbed in. The interior of the limousine smelled of leather and expensive scotch. Jane sat on the edge of the seat, dripping wet, trying not to ruin the upholstery. Julian sat across from her, drying his face with a handkerchief. He handed her a fresh, dry towel from a compartment. Dry off, he said. Where do you live? East Kensington. The apartment's near the old mill, she said. It was the rough part of town. Julian nodded to the driver, and the partition glass slid up, sealing them in. So, Julian started, pouring a small amount of amber liquid into a glass and offering it to her. She shook her head. He took a sip himself. Georgetown linguistics? Jane stiffened. How did you know? I didn't. But you have the accent of an academic, not a local. You enunciate your consonants, and you corrected Victor's grammar. You were a student? I was a doctoral candidate, Jane admitted, looking down at her hands. My specialty was sociolinguistics and dialectology. What happened? Life, Jane said simply. My mother had a stroke. Insurance didn't cover the rehab facility. I had to drop out and work double shifts to keep us afloat. Julian looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and guilt. He lived in a world where money was a digital number, not a matter of survival. And tonight? Why did you step in? I don't like bullies, Jane said, her eyes flashing. And I don't like liars. They were mocking you right to your face. I felt like a fool, Julian admitted, his voice dropping. I pride myself on being smart, Jane. But tonight, I was the dumbest man in the room. Language is power, Jane said. If you don't control the words, you don't control the deal. The car pulled up to a run-down apartment complex. The neon sign above the entrance flickered ominously. Julian looked out the window, frowning. You live here? It's home, Jane said, opening the door. Wait, Julian said. Be at Thorn Tower tomorrow morning. 9 a.m., top floor. For what? My chief of staff just quit. Or rather, I'm going to fire him because he let those Russians into the building without vetting them properly. I need an executive liaison. Someone who travels with me. Someone who translates not just the words, but the intent. Jane laughed, a short, bitter sound. Mr. Thorne, I'm a waitress. I don't know the first thing about corporate strategy. I can teach you business, Julian said, his eyes locking onto hers. I can't teach loyalty, and I certainly can't teach the genius required to master 10 languages. 9 a.m. Jane, the salary is $100,000 a year, plus full medical benefits for you and your family. Jane froze. Full medical. That meant the best doctors for her mum. That meant no more fear of eviction. Why? She asked. Because I have a meeting with the Japanese delegation in 3 days, Julian grinned, a genuine boyish smile that transformed his face. And I have a feeling they're going to try to screw me too. Jane stepped out onto the sidewalk. I'll be there. As the limo drove away, Jane stood in the rain, feeling a strange warmth in her chest. For the first time in years, she wasn't invisible. The next morning, Jane arrived at Thorn Tower wearing her only suit, a charcoal grey ensemble she had saved from her university days. It was a bit loose now, as she had lost weight from skipping meals, but she looked professional. The receptionist sneered at her. Deliveries are in the back. I have a meeting with Mr. Thorne, Jane said, standing tall. Mr. Thorne doesn't take meetings with— "Send her up!" a voice boomed over the intercom system. Jane rode the glass elevator to the 50th floor. When the doors opened, she stepped into a world of white marble and chrome. Julian was standing by the window, looking out over the city. "You're late," he said, turning around. He was joking. It was 8:55 a.m. "I'm early," Jane corrected. "Good. Here." He tossed a thick file onto the desk. "These are the files on the Takahashi Corporation. Read them. Memorize them. We fly to Tokyo tonight." "Tonight?" Jane gasped. "But I have to arrange care for my mother." "Already done," Julian said. "I had my private medical team transfer her to St. Jude's recovery wing this morning. She's in a private room. The best neurologists in the state are reviewing her case as we speak." Jane's mouth fell open. You didn't have to do that." "I need you focused," Julian said, his voice businesslike, though his eyes were soft. "I can't have you worrying about home when we're in the Viper's Nest." "The Viper's Nest?" "Tokyo," Julian said. "Mr. Takahashi is old school. He hates Americans. He thinks we are loud, rude, and uncultured. He's refused to sign the robotics merger for 3 years. He's only agreed to meet me to insult me in person." Jane picked up the file. She felt a spark of the old academic fire ignite in her belly. "He hates Americans who don't understand his culture," she murmured. "Does he know I'm coming?" "No," Julian said. "You're my secret weapon." But as they landed in Tokyo, 14 hours later, things began to go wrong. At the airport, Julian's luggage was missing. His reservation at the Imperial Hotel had been accidentally cancelled. It was a power play. Takahashi was trying to rattle him, to make him look disorganized and weak before the meeting. They ended up in a smaller hotel. Julian was pacing the small room, furious. "This is a disaster. I have to wear the same suit tomorrow. I look like a slob." "Sit down, Julian," Jane said calmly. She was on the phone, speaking rapid-fire Japanese to a local tailor she had found in the directory. She hung up. "A tailor will be here in 20 minutes, and I've arranged for a traditional gift, a high-grade melon and aged whiskey, to be delivered to Takahashi's office as an apology for our disorganization. It shows humility." Julian stopped pacing. He looked at her with awe. "You saved me again." "Not yet," Jane said, her face grim. "I read the file. Takahashi isn't just difficult. He's testing you. But there's a third party involved. Someone named the Viper is mentioned in the footnotes of the emails." "The Viper? It's a nickname," Jane said. "I don't know who it is yet. But tomorrow at the tea ceremony, I'll find out." The next day, the meeting took place in a traditional tea house in Kyoto. It was serene, beautiful, and terrifyingly quiet. Mr. Takahashi sat on the tatami mat, looking like a statue of judgment. He was flanked by 2 stern assistants. Julian bowed. It was a decent bow, but slightly too shallow. Takahashi's eyes narrowed. Jane bowed. It was perfect. The angle, the duration, the placement of her hands. It was flawless etiquette. Takahashi looked at her, surprised. The tea was served. Takahashi spoke in English, but it was clipped and cold. "Mr. Thorne, you persist in bothering me." "I persist in seeing the value of our partnership," Julian said. Takahashi scoffed. He turned to his assistant and muttered in a rare, rural dialect of northern Japan, something almost no foreigner would know. "Tell the American the price has tripled. If he refuses, tell the Viper we are ready to sell to the competition." Jane's heart stopped. The Viper. She leaned over to Julian and whispered, "Accept the triple price. Do it now." "What? That's insane," Julian whispered back. "Trust me," Jane hissed. "It's a test of commitment. And I know who the Viper is." The silence in the tea house was heavy, pressing down on them like the humid Kyoto air. Julian Thorne stared at Jane, his eyes wide with disbelief. Triple the price. It was madness. It would cost the company an additional $200 million. If he was wrong, the board of directors would have his head on a spike. But he looked at Jane. She wasn't trembling anymore. She was sitting with her back straight, her gaze lowered respectfully, but her posture radiating an ironclad confidence. She had heard something he hadn't. "I accept," Julian said, his voice cutting through the quiet. "We will pay 3 times the initial valuation, but we require exclusive rights for 10 years, not 5. Mr. Takahashi stopped mid-sip. He lowered his teacup slowly. For a long, agonizing minute, he stared at Julian. Then, a slow, wrinkled smile spread across his face. "You surprise me, Mr. Thorne," Takahashi said in English, his tone warmer. "I thought you were a man who counted pennies, but I see you are a man who understands value." Takahashi turned to his assistant. "Bring the papers. We sign." As the ink dried on the contract, Takahashi leaned in. "You were wise to agree. The Viper, Miss Isabella Sterling, offered me double just this morning. She is a shark, that one, but she lacks honor. She wanted to strip my robotics division and fire my workers. You, I believe, will build." Julian's blood ran cold. Isabella Sterling. Later, in the back of a town car speeding toward downtown Tokyo, Julian let out a breath he felt he'd been holding for days. "Isabella," he muttered, loosening his tie. "I should have known." "Who is Isabella Sterling?" Jane asked. She was looking out the window at the neon blur of Tokyo, exhausted but exhilarated. "My ex-fiancée," Julian said grimly, "and the CEO of Sterling Dynamics. We broke up 3 years ago. She swore she would destroy my company. She's been the one sabotaging my deals. The Viper! It fits her." He turned to Jane. "You heard him speaking in the northern dialect. What exactly did he say?" "He told his assistant to tell you the price tripled," Jane explained. "But the nuance was specific. He used a grammatical structure that implies a test of character. If you had refused, he would have sold to Isabella immediately, believing you didn't respect his life's work. By accepting, you proved you valued his legacy more than the money." Julian looked at her. In the flashing lights of the city, she looked ethereal. The tired waitress with the chapped hands was gone. In her place was a woman of intellect and grace who had just outmaneuvered 2 global titans. "You're incredible," Julian said softly. Jane blushed, looking away. "I just did my job, Julian." "No, you did more than that." Julian reached out, covering her hand with his. His skin was warm, electric. "Jane, I've been surrounded by people who speak English my whole life, but I've never felt understood until I met you." The air in the car shifted. It became charged, intimate. Jane's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to lean in. She wanted to bridge the gap between the billionaire and the waitress. But then her phone buzzed. It was a text from the nurse at St. Jude's. "Mum is awake. She's asking for you." Jane pulled her hand away gently. "We have a flight to catch, sir, and we have a gala to prepare for." Julian blinked, the spell broken. He cleared his throat. "Right. The Winter Solstice Gala in New York. Isabella will be there. And now that we've beaten her here, she's going to be out for blood." "Let her come," Jane said, a newfound fire in her eyes. "I speak her language, too." They returned to New York as victors. The stock of Thorne Tech soared upon the announcement of the Takahashi merger. But there was no time to rest. The Winter Solstice Gala was the social event of the season, held at the Pierre Hotel. It was a battlefield in tuxedos and ball gowns. Julian had sent a stylist to Jane's apartment. When she walked out of the dressing room, the stylist gasped. Jane was wearing a gown of deep, midnight blue velvet that hugged her frame and flared at the bottom. It was off the shoulder, revealing the elegant slope of her neck. She wore no jewelry except for a pair of diamond drop earrings Julian had insisted she borrow. "You look—" Julian trailed off when he picked her up. He stood in the hallway of her apartment building, stunned. "You look dangerous." "Good," Jane smiled nervously. "Because I'm terrified." "Don't be. You're with me." They arrived at the Pierre. The paparazzi flashes were blinding. Julian guided her through the crowd, his hand possessively on the small of her back. The ballroom was a sea of elites, politicians, heiresses, and tycoons, and there, holding a flute of champagne like a weapon, was Isabella Sterling. She was striking, blonde, tall, and wearing a dress made of gold sequins that looked like armor. She saw Julian and glided over, her eyes flicking dismissively to Jane. "Julian," Isabella purred. "I heard about Tokyo. Congratulations. I suppose overpaying for a rusting robotics company is one way to get press." "It's called strategic expansion, Isabella," Julian said coolly. "Something you might understand if you weren't so focused on corporate raiding." Isabella's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. She turned her attention to Jane. "And who is this?" Isabella asked, looking Jane up and down with open disdain. "I didn't know you were hiring escorts now, Julian. Or is she a mute? She hasn't said a word." Isabella switched to French, assuming Jane wouldn't understand. She spoke to the woman standing next to her, a French fashion editor. "Regardez cette robe. C'est du polyester bon marché. Elle a l'air d'une femme de chambre qui a volé les vêtements de sa maîtresse." "Look at that dress. It's cheap polyester. She looks like a maid who stole her mistress's clothes." Julian stiffened, ready to defend her, but Jane squeezed his arm. She stepped forward. She looked Isabella dead in the eye and smiled. "Mademoiselle Sterling," Jane said, in perfect, aristocratique Parisian French. "Le velours est de la soie italienne, pas du polyester, et je préfère ressembler à une femme de chambre honnête qu'à une reine qui a construit son trône sur des mensonges. Miss Sterling, the velvet is Italian silk, not polyester, and I would rather look like an honest maid than a queen who built her throne on lies." Isabella's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The French editor gasped and covered a laugh. Jane wasn't finished. She leaned in closer, dropping her voice to Italian, a language she knew Isabella spoke, as her mother was from Milan. "E la prossima volta che provi a sabotare un accordo a Kyoto," Jane whispered in sultry Italian, "assicurati che i tuoi traduttori siano bravi quanto me. Il signor Takahashi non ama I serpenti. And the next time you try to sabotage a deal in Kyoto, make sure your translators are as good as me. Mr. Takahashi does not like snakes." Jane stepped back, taking Julian's arm. "Shall we dance, Julian?" Julian was grinning from ear to ear. "I think we shall." They walked onto the dance floor, leaving Isabella Sterling standing there, humiliated and fuming, her golden armor cracked. The waltz was a blur of music and color. Julian held Jane close, spinning her through the crowd. "Remind me never to make you angry," Julian laughed, his eyes sparkling. "You destroyed her." "She deserved it," Jane breathed, feeling dizzy with the proximity. "She insulted you." "She insulted you," Julian corrected. He slowed their dancing as the music softened. "Jane, I don't know what I would do without you. Not just for the company. For me." He stopped dancing. They were in the middle of the floor. but it felt like they were alone. Julian raised his hand and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "I've spent my life listening to people tell me what I want to hear," Julian whispered. "You're the only one who tells me the truth." He leaned in. Jane's breath hitched. She closed her eyes, waiting for the kiss that would change everything. Flash. A camera went off nearby, startling them. Julian pulled back slightly, looking annoyed. It was a society photographer. "Mr. Thorne, a picture with your new assistant." The moment was gone, but the promise of it hung in the air. The next morning, the photo was on the front page of the New York Post. Headline, "Thorne's Mystery Muse, the Waitress Who Took Manhattan." Jane sat in her new office at Thorne Tower, staring at the paper. She should have been happy. Her mother was recovering well. She had a job she loved. She was falling in love with a man who seemed to love her back. But a shadow fell across her desk. It was Marcus, her old manager from the Obsidian. But he wasn't wearing his cheap suit. He was wearing a security visitor badge. "Well, well," Marcus sneered. "Look at you, from cleaning tables to the top of the world." "What do you want, Marcus?" Jane asked, standing up. "I'm here to deliver a package for Mr. Thorne," Marcus said, placing a manila envelope on her desk. "And to tell you that karma is a funny thing, Jane. You think you belong here? You're a fraud." "Get out," Jane said. Marcus laughed and left. Jane stared at the envelope. It was marked "Confidential" for Julian Thorne. She debated opening it. As his executive liaison, she vetted his mail. She sliced it open. Inside were bank statements, transfers. Her blood turned to ice. They were records of a wire transfer, $500,000, sent from a Cayman Islands account linked to Sterling Dynamics, directly into the bank account of St. Jude's Hospital, specifically allocated to the care of Mary Vance, Jane's mother. There was also a fabricated email chain. It looked like it was sent from Jane's personal email to Isabella Sterling. Email subject, the Takahashi file. Body, I have the price points. Julian is desperate. Wire the money for my mother's surgery, and I'll ensure he overpays, so you can buy him out later. It was a frame-up. A perfect, brutal frame-up. Isabella hadn't just been humiliated. She had been plotting. She knew Jane's weak point was her mother. She had anonymously paid the hospital bill using a shell company and forged the emails to make it look like a bribe. The door to the office slammed open. Julian walked in. He wasn't smiling. He was holding a tablet, his face pale with rage. Behind him were 2 security guards. "Julian?" Jane asked, her voice trembling. "Tell me it's not true," Julian said, his voice breaking. He threw the tablet onto her desk. It showed the same emails. "I just got a call from the bank, a $500,000 transfer from Sterling's holding company to your mother's hospital account. Did you sell me out, Jane?" "No!" Jane cried. "Julian, this is a lie. Isabella planted this. Marcus was just here. He brought—" "Marcus!" Julian shouted. "Marcus came to me this morning. He told me he overheard you on the phone with Isabella weeks ago at the restaurant. He said you planned this from the start, that you staged the translation scene to get close to me." "That's insane. You know that's not true," Jane pleaded, reaching for him. Julian stepped back, revulsion in his eyes. "Do I? I found you in the rain. You were desperate for money. You have a sick mother. It's the perfect motive. I let you into my head. I let you into my negotiations. You played me." "I love you," Jane whispered, tears streaming down her face. Julian flinched as if he'd been slapped. "Don't use that word. You're fired, Jane. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out." "Julian, please, or check the timestamps. Check the IP addresses." "I checked the bank transfer," Julian roared. "The money is there, in your mother's account. Did you think I wouldn't find out? I didn't know about the money. She must have wired it without me knowing to frame me. Goodbye, Jane. Julian turned his back on her. He stared out the window, his shoulders shaking. One of the security guards grabbed Jane's arm. Mom, you need to come with us. Jane looked at Julian's back. She wanted to scream. She wanted to fight. But the evidence was damning. She had been outplayed by a master manipulator. She let the guard lead her out. She walked past the secretaries who whispered and pointed. She walked into the elevator. As the doors closed, she didn't cry. The tears stopped. A cold resolve settled in her chest. She wasn't the scared waitress anymore. She was the woman who had stared down Viktor Volkov and humiliated Isabella Sterling. They thought she was a fraud. Fine. She would show them exactly who she was. Jane was thrown out onto the street. It was raining again, just like the night they met. Poetic justice? She thought bitterly. She went straight to the hospital. She had to freeze that account. She had to prove the money was unsolicited. But when she arrived at St. Jude's, the receptionist looked at her with pity. Miss Vance? We received a call from Mr. Thorne's office. He has revoked his personal guarantee. But the balance on your mother's account is paid in full by the anonymous donor. So she can stay. Jane felt sick. Isabella had paid the bill. If Jane returned the money, her mother would be kicked out and would likely die. If she kept the money, she was accepting the bribe she was accused of taking. It was a checkmate. Jane went to her mother's room. Her mum was sleeping, looking more peaceful than she had in years. Jane kissed her forehead. I'm going to fix this, Mum, she whispered. I promise. She left the hospital and went to the public library. She didn't have a computer anymore. Thorne Tech had confiscated her laptop. She logged onto a public terminal. She needed help. She needed someone who hated Isabella Sterling as much as Julian did, but who wouldn't be blinded by emotion. She typed a name into the search bar, Viktor Volkov, the Russian billionaire she had humiliated in Part 1. It was a dangerous gamble. But Jane knew something about men like Volkov. They respected strength, and they hated being used. Isabella Sterling had used the chaos caused by Volkov's failed deal to try and swoop in. Jane found a contact number for Volkov's holding company in Moscow. She dialed it on her cracked cell phone. Volkov Consortium, a voice answered in Russian. Connect me to Viktor, Jane said in Russian. Tell him it's the waitress who speaks the truth. There was a long pause. Then a deep laugh echoed on the line. The little mouse, Victor's voice came through. You have nerve calling me. Isabella Sterling framed me, Jane said bluntly. And she used your failed negotiation as a smoke screen to try and destroy Julian Thorne. She thinks you are weak, Victor. She's telling people in New York that she picked up the scraps you left behind. Silence on the other end. Jane knew she had struck a nerve. Vanity was Volkov's weakness. Why should I help you? Victor asked. You cost me millions. I saved you from a lawsuit, Jane corrected. Julian was going to sue you for fraud if he signed that contract. I saved your reputation. Now I need a favor. I need the server logs from the Cayman Bank. I know you own a stake in that bank, Victor. Victor chuckled darkly. You're smarter than the American knows. Very well. Meet my associate at the shipping docks in New Jersey. Midnight. Come alone. Jane hung up. She was terrified, but she had no choice. Meanwhile, at Thorne Tower, Julian was falling apart. He sat in his office, drinking scotch. The room felt empty without Jane. He kept looking at the door, hoping she would walk in with a file and a solution. Sir. It was his head of IT, a nervous young man named Kevin. What is it? Julian snapped. I was looking at the email headers again, sir. The ones from Jane to Isabella. And? Well, sir, the syntax is wrong. Julian frowned. What do you mean? The email uses the Oxford comma, Kevin said, and it uses American spelling for program. But in all of Jane's official reports, she uses British spelling because she studied at Georgetown under a British professor, and she never uses the Oxford comma. It's a linguistic fingerprint, sir. These emails, they don't sound like her. Julian froze. He put the glass down. Linguistic fingerprint, he whispered. He remembered what Jane had said in the car. I don't like liars. He remembered her eyes when he fired her. The hurt, the confusion. He stood up. Trace the IP again. Go deeper. Bypass the proxy. I can't, sir. It's military-grade encryption. Then find someone who can break it, Julian shouted, throwing the glass against the wall. At midnight, Jane stood on the foggy docks of New Jersey. A black SUV rolled up. The window didn't roll down. The back door opened. Sitting inside wasn't a Russian mobster. It was Dmitri, the man who had been with Victor at the restaurant. He handed Jane a USB drive. Victor sends his regards, Dmitri said in Russian. He hates Isabella Sterling more than he hates you. This drive contains the original transfer request. It was signed digitally by Isabella herself, and it contains a recording. A recording? Isabella called Marcus, your manager. She offered him $50,000 to lie to Thorne. We recorded the call. We record everything. Jane clutched the drive like a lifeline. Thank you. Do not thank us, Dmitri said, his eyes cold. Victor says you owe him a dinner in Moscow. The SUV sped away. Jane stood under the street lamp. She had the proof. She could clear her name. But she wasn't just going to email it to Julian. That wasn't enough. He had humiliated her. He had broken her trust. Tomorrow was the board meeting, where Julian was set to finalize the Takahashi merger. Isabella Sterling was going to be there as a minority shareholder to try and block it one last time. Jane wasn't going to knock on the door. She was going to kick it down. The boardroom on the 60th floor of Thorne Tower was a fortress of glass and steel, suspended above the clouds. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. The 12 members of the board of directors sat around the long mahogany table, their faces grim. At the head of the table sat Julian Thorne. He looked terrible. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usually immaculate tie was slightly crooked. He hadn't slept since he fired Jane. The silence in his apartment had been deafening, and the linguistic fingerprint discovery by his IT guy was eating him alive. He knew, deep in his gut, he had made a catastrophic mistake. To his right sat Isabella Sterling. She looked radiant, predatory, and victorious. She wore a white suit, projecting an image of purity and competence. Ladies and gentlemen, Isabella began, her voice smooth as silk. We are facing a crisis of confidence. Julian's judgment has been compromised. He allowed a waitress, a woman with no background, no security clearance, and clearly no morals, to infiltrate our most sensitive negotiations. She paused, making eye contact with the chairman of the board. The Takahashi merger is poisoned, Isabella continued. Mr. Takahashi values honor above all else. When news breaks that Julian's chief negotiator was taking bribes from competitors, Takahashi will walk. Thorne Tech stock will plummet. I am proposing a vote of no confidence in Julian Thorne as CEO. Sterling Dynamics is prepared to acquire a controlling stake to stabilize the ship. The board members murmured. They were swaying. Fear was a powerful motivator, and Isabella was playing it like a virtuoso. I second the motion, said a board member who was secretly on Isabella's payroll. Julian stood up, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "This is a hostile takeover, masked as a rescue mission." Isabella fabricated that evidence. "Do you have proof, Julian?" Isabella asked, smiling sweetly. "Or are you just protecting your girlfriend?" Julian opened his mouth, but he had nothing. He had the IT report about commas, but it wasn't hard evidence. It wouldn't stand up in a boardroom. He was about to lose his company. Bam! The double doors to the boardroom flew open with a force that rattled the windows. Security guards scrambled, shouting, "Ma'am, you can't go in there!" Jane Vance stepped into the room. She wasn't wearing a waitress uniform. She wasn't wearing a borrowed gown. She was wearing her old, slightly oversized charcoal suit, but she wore it like armor. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes were burning with a cold, terrifying intelligence. In her hand, she clenched a silver USB drive. "Security!" Isabella shrieked, standing up. "Remove this woman immediately. She is trespassing." Two guards grabbed Jane's arms. "Let her speak!" Julian roared. His voice cracked with a mix of relief and desperation. "If anyone touches her, they are fired." The guards hesitated, looking between the current CEO and the potential new owner. They released Jane. Jane didn't look at Julian. She didn't look at the board. She walked straight toward Isabella Sterling. "You speak 4 languages, Isabella," Jane said, her voice calm and projecting clearly across the room. "English, French, Italian, and Spanish. You think that makes you worldly. You think that makes you smart." Jane stopped at the foot of the table. "But you don't speak the language of the streets," Jane continued. "You don't speak the language of desperation, and you certainly don't speak Russian." Isabella laughed nervously. "This is pathetic. Julian, get your ex-maid out of here." Jane held up the USB drive. "Yesterday I had a conversation with Viktor Volkov. It turns out he doesn't like being used as a pawn in your little games." Isabella's face went pale. The name Volkov sucked the air out of the room. "Connect this," Jane commanded, tossing the drive to the IT technician in the corner. The tech looked at Julian. Julian nodded. The large screen behind Julian flickered to life. An audio file appeared. "This is a recording from a burner phone," Jane explained to the board. "Date, November 14th. Location, the loading dock behind the Obsidian restaurant." The audio played. It was crystal clear. $50,000, Marcus. Cash. All you have to do is say you heard her plotting. Say she was on the phone with me. That was Isabella's voice. Unmistakable. "I don't know, Miss Sterling. Jane is a good kid." That was Marcus. "Don't be stupid. She's a waitress. She's nobody. You want to be a manager forever. Take the money. Frame her. And I'll make sure you get a position at one of my hotels." "All right. I'll do it." The recording ended. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. It was heavier than the silence in the tea house in Kyoto. Jane turned to the screen again. "And this," she said, signaling the tech to open the next file, "is the digital signature of the wire transfer to St. Jude's Hospital. It didn't come from a shell company. It came from Isabella Sterling's personal trust, routed through the Caymans. She got lazy. She signed the authorization with her own biometric key." A collective gasp went through the room. The chairman of the board looked at Isabella with disgust. "Isabella," the chairman said, his voice like gravel. "Is this true?" Isabella was shaking, her facade of perfection cracked and shattered. She looked around the room, realizing she had no allies left. "It was business!" she screamed, her voice shrill. "He was going to ruin the market. I did what I had to do." "You committed corporate espionage, fraud, and bribery," Julian said, his voice low and deadly. "And you tried to destroy an innocent woman's life to do it." Julian turned to the security guards. Escort Miss Sterling out, and call the police. I'm pressing charges." Isabella was dragging out, screaming curses in French and Italian. Jane watched her go, her expression unreadable. When the doors closed, Julian exhaled. He looked at the board. "The motion to remove me?" "Withdrawn," the chairman said instantly. "Julian, we apologize." Julian didn't care about them. He walked around the table, ignoring the murmurs of the directors. He stopped in front of Jane. He looked at her, as if she were a miracle. "Jane," he breathed, "you saved me. Again. Even after I—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The shame choked him. Jane looked at him. Her eyes were dry. "I didn't do it for you, Julian. I did it for my name. And I did it because I keep my promises. I told you I would handle the vipers." "Jane, I am so sorry," Julian said, reaching for her hand. "I should have trusted you. I saw the bank transfer and I panicked. I was an idiot. Please, let me make it up to you. Come back. Name your salary. Double it. Triple it." Jane looked at his hand, then up at his face. She stepped back. "No," she said softly. Julian froze. "What?" "I can't work for a man who doesn't trust me," Jane said. "You saw a bank statement, and you forgot everything you knew about me. You forgot who I was. I'm not a waitress you can hire and fire, and I'm not a thief. I'm Jane Vance, and I deserve better." She turned around. "Jane, wait!" Julian called out, panic rising in his chest. "Goodbye, Mr. Thorne," she said. She walked out of the boardroom, head held high. She took the elevator down to the lobby, walked out the front doors, and stepped into the sunlight. She felt light. She felt free. She had cleared her name. She had protected her mother. She had won. But as she walked down the busy New York street, tears finally began to fall, because winning felt an awful lot like losing the only man she had ever loved. 3 days later, Jane was back in her apartment, packing. She was going to move her mother to a facility in Vermont, somewhere quiet and cheaper. She was done with the high-stakes world of billionaires. There was a knock on her door. She ignored it. It was probably the landlord. The knock came again, louder. "Jane, I know you're in there." It was Julian. Jane sighed. She walked to the door and opened it, leaving the chain on. "Go away, Julian." Through the crack, she saw him. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. He looked disheveled, desperate, and human. "I'm not leaving," Julian said. "I've been standing here for an hour. I learned sign language." Jane blinked. "What?" Julian took a step back. He raised his hands. His movements were clumsy, slow, and clearly practiced in front of a mirror 1,000 times. He signed, "I am a fool." Jane almost smiled. "Your syntax is terrible." Julian continued signing, his face intense with concentration. "I love you." Then he spoke. "I don't want an executive liaison, Jane. I have plenty of people who can read contracts. I need the person who reads me. I realize something. You speak every language in the world, but I never bothered to learn yours. I never bothered to learn what it feels like to be invisible, to be hungry, to be afraid." He reached into his pocket. Jane tensed, expecting money or a contract. He pulled out a ring. It wasn't a diamond. It was a simple band of twisted gold, old and worn. "This was my grandmother's," Julian said. "She was an immigrant. She scrubbed floors so my father could go to college. She taught me that character is what you do when things are hard. I failed that test 3 days ago. Let me retake it." He looked at her through the crack in the door. "I'm not offering you a job," Julian said. "I'm offering you a partnership, 50-50, in everything. My life, my company, my heart. Please, Jane, open the door." Jane looked at the man who had everything, standing in a dirty hallway, begging for the one thing money couldn't buy. She undid the chain. She opened the door. "You need lessons," Jane said, tears welling in her eyes. "Your signing accent is atrocious." Julian laughed, a sound of pure relief, and pulled her into his arms. He kissed her, and this time there were no cameras, no contracts, and no lies, just two people speaking the same language. The Obsidian restaurant had a new owner. Jane Vance sat at table 9, the power table. But she wasn't serving. She was wearing a stunning red dress, reading a report on the Thorne-Volkoff Renewable Energy Initiative. Julian sat across from her. "Ready for the meeting?" he asked. "Born ready," Jane smiled. A waiter approached the table. He was young, nervous, and his hand was shaking as he held the water pitcher. He spilled a little on the tablecloth. I am so sorry," the waiter stammered, terrified. Julian looked at the stain. Then he looked at the waiter. "It's all right," Julian said gently. "Take your time. What's your name?" "Leo, sir." "Leo," Jane said warmly, looking at the boy. "Do you speak any other languages?" I speak Spanish, Ma'am, and I'm studying engineering." Jane and Julian exchanged a look. "Well, Leo," Julian said, smiling, "when your shift is over, come see us. We might have an opening in the engineering department." The waiter's jaw dropped. Jane took Julian's hand. They weren't just building a company anymore. They were building a legacy. And it all started with a billionaire who learned to listen and a waitress who finally found her voice. And that is the incredible story of Jane and Julian. It shows that true power isn't about the money in your bank account, but the richness of your mind and the strength of your character. Jane proved that you should never underestimate someone just because of their job title. The person serving your coffee might just be the smartest person in the room. What did you think of Julian's apology? Do you think Jane should have forgiven him so quickly? Or did he do enough to earn her trust back? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of romance, betrayal, and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.